Have you ever wondered what happens when an elite tech dynasty corners a cybersecurity architect? They believe their wealth can bend reality, forgetting that the one who holds the source code is the true God. My arrogant husband demanded I apologize for a crime I never committed or get out of his house. I chose the latter. I took our 4-year-old daughter, walked away, and pressed enter to erase his $1 billion empire. Hello, wonderful listeners of Violet Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep our operations running. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to sustain their livelihoods and continue bringing these stories to life for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment below. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. My name is Gianna Simmons. I am 32 years old and a senior security expert at Aegis Vanguard Tech. But to the Vance family, my title meant absolutely nothing. The annual Vance Family Anniversary Gala was in full swing at their sprawling smart mega mansion on Mercer Island. The estate was a monument to Seattle tech money, a sterile fortress of floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, polished Italian marble, and biometric security checkpoints. Every single light, temperature shift, and musical note in the house was controlled by a central artificial intelligence system that they loved to brag about. Yet, despite the multi-million-dollar climate control, the air inside that house always felt suffocating to me. It was a suffocating chill born not from the air conditioning, but from the rotten, narrow-minded core of the people who owned it. I stood near the edge of the grand ballroom, nursing a glass of sparkling water, feeling the familiar weight of their collective disdain to the Seattle elite, and most importantly, to my mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance. I was an interloper. I came from a working-class neighborhood. I built my career on academic scholarships, sleepless nights, and an unmatched understanding of cybersecurity architecture. They, on the other hand, built their empire on ruthlessness, stolen ideas, and inherited wealth. They viewed my calloused hands and public school background as a disgusting stain on their pristine family portrait. The jazz quartet was playing a soft, elegant tune when the heavy mahogany doors of the dining hall slammed open. Chloe Vance, my arrogant sister-in-law, and the completely inept figurehead director of the family company, stormed into the room. Her designer heels clicked aggressively against the marble floor. The gentle chatter of the wealthy guests died down instantly as all eyes turned to her. Chloe marched straight toward the center of the room where the family was gathered. Without a single word of warning, she raised her hand and hurled a silver military-grade hard drive straight onto the crystal dining table. It collided with a champagne flute, shattering the delicate glass and sending expensive liquor spilling over the pristine white tablecloth. "You pathetic thief!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings, dripping with venom and manufactured hysteria. "Did you really think we would not find out? Did you really believe you could just waltz into our secure servers, download the entire source code for our proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm, and sell it to our biggest rival?" A collective gasp rippled through the room. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at the empty hard drive resting among the shattered glass, and then at Chloe, my face completely impassive. It was a setup, a clumsy, desperate, and entirely fabricated setup designed by a woman who felt deeply threatened by my actual competence. Before I could even open my mouth to dismantle her ridiculous claim, a cold, mocking voice sliced through the tension. "I always warned Julian about this," Eleanor Vance said, stepping out from the shadows of the floral arrangements. My mother-in-law swirled her martini. Her eyes locked onto mine with unmasked hatred. "You can dress a beggar in designer silk, but you can never wash away the stench of their greed. We gave you everything, Gianna. We elevated you from the gutter, and this dirty, pathetic theft is how you repay our generosity. Your wretched background was bound to show its true colors eventually." I turned my gaze to Julian, my husband, the man who had promised to stand by me, to protect me from the toxic venom of his family. I waited for him to step forward, to laugh at the absurdity of the accusation, to defend the woman he claimed to love. Instead, Julian closed the distance between us, his face twisted into an ugly mask of condescension. He did not look at me like a husband looking at his wife. He looked at me like a master looking at a disobedient servant. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh with a painful, bruising force. He dragged me slightly forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with his mother and sister, forming a united front against me. "You have humiliated this family for the last time," Julian roared, his breath hot and reeking of scotch against my face. He leaned in, delivering his ruthless ultimatum for the entire room to hear. "Apologize to Chloe immediately and hand over the stolen data, or you can pack your miserable things and get out of my house tonight." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. I did not shed a single tear. There was no panic in my chest, no heartbreak, only a profound, freezing clarity. The illusion of my marriage shattered just as easily as the champagne flute on the table. My eyes rose to meet his, cold as glacial ice. With a slow, deliberate movement, I wrenched my arm free from his grasp. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, my posture perfectly straight, towering over them in spirit if not in height. "You will pay a very high price for your choice tonight," I said, my voice echoing clearly and firmly across the silent room. I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on the glittering chandeliers, the shattered glass, and the corrupt dynasty that thought they owned me. I kept my head high and walked proudly out the grand double doors, stepping into the cold, forgiving darkness of the Seattle night. The torrential rain of the Pacific Northwest hammered against the windshield of my SUV, but my grip on the steering wheel remained remarkably steady. I navigated the slick, winding roads of Seattle with the mechanical precision of a line of code executing its function. There was no room for panic. Panic was a human flaw, an unpredictable variable I had eliminated from my personal algorithm the moment I walked out of that mansion. My first and only priority was waiting for me at a modest, well-lit house in Bellevue. Mrs. Higgins, my trusted nanny of 3 years, opened the door with a sympathetic smile, handing over my sleeping 4-year-old daughter, Harper. The little girl was completely bundled in a soft pink blanket, her breathing slow and rhythmic. She was safe, perfectly happy, and blissfully unaware of the storm her father had just unleashed. I carried her to the car, securing her in her car seat without waking her. I was not running away in blind terror. Running implied fear. I was executing a carefully constructed contingency plan. Reaching into the glove compartment, I pulled out a waterproof envelope. Inside rested 2 business-class round-trip tickets to Reykjavik, Iceland, along with our passports. Thanks to my late maternal grandmother, I held dual citizenship, and Iceland offered something the Vance family wealth could never buy, which was absolute jurisdictional distance. Hours later, we were thousands of feet above the earth. The steady hum of the aircraft engines provided a soothing white noise. Harper was curled up in her spacious first-class seat, her arms wrapped tightly around her favorite stuffed bear, deep in a peaceful slumber. I sat in the seat beside her, completely alert. I reached into my carry-on bag and withdrew my custom-built laptop. It was a heavy, unassuming machine, fortified with military-grade encryption and multiple layers of biometric security. I flipped the screen open. The terminal window blinked back at me in stark green text against a pitch-black background. It was time to begin the game. While I crossed time zones, morning broke over Mercer Island, back at the mega mansion. Julian finally stirred. He woke up with a pounding hangover from the expensive scotch he had consumed the night before. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, a smug, expectant smirk slowly forming on his face. He was waiting for the notifications. He fully expected to see dozens of missed calls, frantic text messages, and pathetic voicemails from me, begging for forgiveness and a chance to return to his lavish cage. It was his standard psychological manipulation playbook. He would isolate, threaten, wait for the breakdown, and then swoop in as the magnanimous savior. But his phone screen was entirely blank. No missed calls, no messages, nothing. The silence infuriated him. His smirk vanished, replaced by a dark, ugly scowl. If I was going to play hard to get, he decided he would quickly remind me who controlled the resources. He dialed the direct number for the company IT department. "Listen to me very carefully," Julian barked into the receiver the moment the line connected, not bothering to offer a greeting. "I want Gianna Simmons completely cut off. Lock every single corporate access credential she has. Then, get a hold of our private bankers. Freeze every joint bank account. Suspend all her credit cards. And block any digital wallets linked to the family trust. I want her completely financially paralyzed by noon. Let us see how long she lasts out on the street with zero cash." He waited for the usual subservient confirmation from his employee. Instead, there was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. "Did you hear me?" Julian snapped, his voice rising in volume. "Sir?" the director finally responded. His voice was trembling so violently it sounded like he was standing naked in a freezing blizzard. "I cannot do that." "What do you mean? You cannot do that? I am the CEO, and I am giving you a direct order to cut my wife out of the network." "You do not understand, Mr. Vance," the director stammered, the terror in his voice now unmistakable. "It is not just her accounts. It is everything. The entire Vance family server system, the corporate database, the proprietary artificial intelligence development nodes, the offshore financial ledgers. We have completely lost access." Julian sat up in his bed, the hangover suddenly forgotten. "What are you talking about? Did she steal the access keys?" "No, sir. We are locked out. A mysterious, highly sophisticated malware has infected the root core of our architecture. It has encrypted every single byte of data we possess. We are completely shut out of our own empire." We touched down in Iceland just as the midnight sun cast an ethereal, golden glow over the rugged volcanic landscape. A prearranged secure transport took us far from the tourist routes, driving for hours deep into the isolated, wind-swept highlands. Our destination was a fortified wooden cabin nestled against a towering basalt cliff face, a property I had discreetly purchased through 3 layers of anonymous shell companies over a year ago. It was entirely off the grid, heavily insulated against the biting cold, running completely on geothermal energy, and equipped with a private satellite uplink. More importantly, it sat squarely outside the jurisdictional reach of United States law enforcement and any extradition treaties they might try to manipulate. Harper was already happily exploring the cozy interior, fascinated by the panoramic windows framing the majestic, sweeping valleys. She was safe, warm, and smiling. Now, I could finally sit down at the heavy oak table, plug in my terminal, and turn my full attention to the screen. The world believed Aegis Vanguard Tech was a pioneer in next-generation artificial intelligence, a shining beacon of Seattle innovation that was pushing the boundaries of machine learning. That was the glossy public relations lie they sold to Wall Street. The rotting truth, the actual dark foundation of the Vance family's $1 billion empire, was something far more sinister. They were not brilliant innovators. They were ruthless, high-tech digital extortionists. For years, the company had been secretly embedding highly classified, entirely undetectable spyware into the firmware of their elite enterprise security products. These were the very products purchased and installed by federal government agencies, rival billionaires, international banking conglomerates, and even massive underground crime syndicates. The Vance family had quietly engineered unrestricted backdoor access to the private servers of the most powerful and dangerous people on the planet. They relentlessly harvested evidence of illicit affairs, massive embezzled funds, classified political campaign strategies, and criminal logistics. Then, they weaponized that exact data, quietly bleeding their targets dry through regular, untraceable cryptocurrency payments just to ensure their continued silence. They thought I was just the quiet, working-class wife, lucky to be allowed at their crystal dining table. They severely underestimated what a senior cybersecurity architect is capable of when left alone in a smart house wired directly into the corporate mainframe. Over the past 3 years, while Julian was out entertaining his mistresses in luxury hotel suites, and Eleanor was hosting extravagant charity galas to boost her social profile, I used my ethical hacking expertise to meticulously map every single node of their illegal blackmail operation. I wrote a custom piece of malware, a perfectly silent Trojan horse, and buried it deep within the very core of their encrypted server farm. It masqueraded perfectly as a routine, harmless system diagnostic protocol, easily bypassing all their multi-million-dollar internal firewalls. It was a digital dead man's switch, waiting patiently in the dark. And when Julian arrogantly ordered his information technology director to revoke my access credentials and freeze my assets, his command unknowingly interacted with a specific, hidden line of code I had left behind. His petty attempt to lock me out was the exact digital fingerprint required to flip the kill switch and activate the protocol. Back in the Mercer Island mansion, the initial confusion was rapidly escalating into pure, unadulterated terror. The massive command screens in Julian's private home office, which usually displayed the steady, comforting graphs of their illicit wealth, were now flashing violently with crimson-red error codes. Julian stood completely paralyzed as the command terminals began executing hundreds of unauthorized transfers. The Trojan I had awakened was not just encrypting their massive blackmail files to render them useless, it was systematically targeting their hidden, offshore cryptocurrency wallets. Julian watched, his breath catching painfully in his throat, as digital ledgers holding tens of millions of dollars began to drain simultaneously right before his eyes. The malware was rapidly liquidating their Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Monero holdings, routing the massive funds through thousands of decentralized mixing services to completely scrub the transaction histories. From there, the money was blasted out across the globe, deposited directly and permanently into the accounts of domestic abuse shelters, clean water initiatives, and global human rights organizations. "Stop it right now," Julian screamed into his phone, slamming his fists onto the tempered glass desk so hard his knuckles bled. "Shut the mainframes down. Cut the physical power lines. Destroy the hard drives if you have to." The information technology director on the other end was practically sobbing. "I cannot do anything." "Sir, the malware has locked out all administrative overrides. It is rewriting the access protocols faster than we can type. The money is just gone." Julian grabbed a heavy, solid bronze sculpture from his bookshelf and hurled it at the primary monitor, shattering the high-definition screen into a spiderweb of dead, black pixels. He tore the thick power cables directly from the walls, his chest heaving with blind panic. But the battery-powered secondary monitors continued to document the ongoing financial massacre. $500 million evaporated, $700 million gone, $900 million transferred. Within exactly 24 minutes, the combined net worth of the mighty Vance dynasty plummeted to absolute zero. They were completely and utterly bankrupt. The heavy office door swung open, and Eleanor marched in, her face a mask of cold fury as she took in the sight of her son hyperventilating among the wreckage of his pristine office. She did not comprehend the absolute finality of the digital slaughter that had just occurred. In her archaic, deeply arrogant mind, money and brute force were the ultimate solutions to any problem in the world. "Get up off the floor this instant, Julian, and stop acting like a pathetic child," she snapped, stepping carefully over the shattered glass in her designer slippers. "She is just one woman sitting somewhere with a laptop. We have dealt with much worse threats than a disgruntled, ungrateful housewife." Eleanor calmly pulled out her own highly encrypted satellite phone. She was certainly not going to call the federal police, because any official investigation would instantly expose their massive extortion ring and send them all to federal prison. Instead, she accessed a highly secure dark web portal. She contacted a notorious private mercenary syndicate composed of ex-Special Forces operatives, a group infamous for handling violent, off-the-books extractions and assassinations. "I do not care what it costs, and I do not care who you have to bribe. Eleanor ordered the voice on the other end of the encrypted line, her tone dripping with absolute entitlement and malice. Track her passport records immediately. Find exactly where she landed in Iceland. I want a heavily armed team on the ground within 12 hours. You are to secure the 4-year-old child and bring her to an undisclosed, secure location. Once the mother realizes we have the girl, she will decrypt every single file and return every last cent, or she will never see her precious daughter again. Eleanor Vance truly believed that her immense wealth made her an untouchable god, capable of commanding private armies from the comfort of her living room. She confidently expected a team of elite killers to board a chartered flight to Reykjavik, retrieve my daughter, and force me to my knees. What she did not anticipate was that the encrypted dark web portal she utilized was one I had been actively monitoring for 18 months, less than 45 minutes after she authorized the massive cryptocurrency bounty to the mercenary syndicate. The heavily armed strike team arrived at a private hangar at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. They did not even have the chance to load their tactical gear onto the jet. Dozens of federal agents and heavily armored SWAT units swarmed the tarmac, pinning the elite killers to the concrete. I had preemptively compiled every single digital footprint of Eleanor's illegal transactions, neatly packaged the routing numbers, and delivered the entire dossier to the cyber division of Interpol. The hunters were neutralized before they could even zip up their combat boots. Back on Mercer Island, the arrogance of the Vance family was about to face its ultimate, agonizing execution. They operated under the assumption that this was a standard digital hostage situation. They assumed I was going to hold their precious data for ransom, demanding a fat check and a quiet divorce settlement in exchange for the decryption keys. But they completely misunderstood my motives. I had zero interest in extorting them. I did not want a single cent of their dirty money. I wanted pure, unadulterated annihilation. The Vance family loved to brag about their state-of-the-art smart mansion. They loved the convenience of voice-activated ambient lighting, high-definition security cameras tracking every room, and smart speakers listening to their every command. It was a monument to their vanity. It was also the perfect trap. Over the years, I had quietly rewritten the firmware on every single smart device inside that house, every microphone in the crystal chandeliers, every camera embedded in the sleek television screens, and every environmental sensor had been operating as a silent, invisible witness to their crimes. As Julian paced furiously around the living room and Eleanor screamed into a dead phone, the massive 75-inch monitors in the mansion suddenly flickered back to life. But they were not displaying error codes anymore. They were displaying a high-definition live broadcast. I had programmed the central artificial intelligence to automatically compile thousands of hours of hidden audio and video recordings. The screens played crystal-clear footage of Julian casually discussing how to blackmail a prominent state senator. It played crisp audio of Eleanor laughing ruthlessly as she ordered the destruction of a rival tech executive by threatening to leak his private medical records. It showed Chloe drunkenly bragging about how their spyware was embedded in the communication networks of a notorious South American cartel. This damning compilation was not just playing inside their house. My malware had forcefully established a massive, decentralized live stream, broadcasting the unedited footage across hundreds of encrypted dark web forums. More devastatingly, the automated system was simultaneously blasting personalized emails, complete with direct video attachments, straight into the private, highly secure inboxes of the exact powerful billionaires, corrupt politicians, and brutal syndicate leaders the Vance family had secretly extorted for years. The fallout was absolute and immediate. The global financial markets operate on rumors, but they execute on hard evidence. Within exactly 3 hours of the broadcast going live, major financial news networks picked up the story of the catastrophic data breach at Aegis Vanguard Tech. The revelation that the premier security firm in the nation was actually a massive, illegal blackmail ring triggered an apocalyptic investor flight. Institutional shareholders dumped their stock in a blind panic. The company valuation plummeted by 99% in a single afternoon. The massive billion-dollar empire was not just broke. It was publicly gutted and left to bleed out on the trading floor. In the west wing of the mansion, Chloe Vance experienced her own spectacular downfall, the spoiled heiress, whose entire existence revolved around curated social media feeds and expensive designer handbags, stared at her phone in absolute horror. Her verified accounts were being systematically hacked and defaced. Her millions of fake followers were gone. Instead, her direct messages were overflowing with graphic, terrifying death threats written in Russian, Spanish, and Mandarin. The criminal underworld had seen the broadcast. They knew exactly who had been stealing their money and spying on their operations. Chloe collapsed onto her imported Persian rug, weeping uncontrollably, screaming for her mother as the reality of her new, horrifying vulnerability finally shattered her fragile, entitled ego. The atmosphere inside the mega mansion transformed from suffocating arrogance to absolute, primal panic. Julian and Eleanor finally grasped the horrifying truth of their situation. They were completely penniless. Their crimes were utterly exposed to federal authorities, and their darkest secrets had just been hand-delivered to the most violently unforgiving people on the planet. "We have to leave right now, or we are dead," Julian screamed, his voice cracking with unprecedented terror. There was no time to pack designer luggage. There was no time to call their high-priced defense attorneys. Under the cover of total darkness, the mighty Julian and Eleanor Vance sneaked out the back door of their architectural masterpiece. They did not take the luxury sports cars or the armored utility vehicles sitting in the grand driveway, knowing those vehicles were equipped with GPS trackers. Instead, they scrambled into a rusted 10-year-old sedan belonging to one of their underpaid groundskeepers. As Julian frantically hotwired the mediocre car and sped away from the Mercer Island estate, the bitter irony hung heavy in the damp Seattle air. The untouchable tech royalty had lost absolutely everything. They were no longer the apex predators of the digital age. They were now the prey, fleeing blindly into the night, hunted by the ghosts of the very empire they had built on the suffering of others. It took Julian and Eleanor 48 hours of frantic, miserable travel to cross the Atlantic Ocean. They used poorly forged passports, purchased at extortionate rates, and spent the absolute last of their hidden emergency cash to bribe low-level cargo plane smugglers. They completely abandoned Chloe without a second thought, leaving the terrified heiress to face the violent wrath of the angry mobs and federal agents swarming Seattle. Their final, desperate destination was an unmarked, brutalist concrete building hidden deep within a desolate industrial park on the outskirts of London. This heavily fortified bunker was their ultimate fail-safe. It was a secret backup data center, physically disconnected from the main corporate grid, holding the only remaining physical master override key to the entire Aegis Vanguard artificial intelligence architecture. Julian was practically hyperventilating. His hands shook violently as he swiped a stolen, encrypted access card and punched a complex 16-digit alphanumeric code into the keypad beside the reinforced steel door. The heavy vault slowly hissed open, releasing a blast of freezing, recycled air. The room inside was cold, sterile, and filled with the low, monotonous hum of massive, dormant server racks holding thousands of terabytes of data. Eleanor pushed past him aggressively. Her meticulously styled hair was a disheveled rat nest, and her famously expensive designer coat was stained with sweat and dirt. She looked exactly like what she truly was beneath the money of feral. Vicious animal cornered in a steel cage. "Hurry up and plug the master drive in right now," Eleanor hissed, her voice raspy and shaking from severe exhaustion. "If we can just reboot the core security architecture from this offline node, we can lock her out of the remaining nodes and salvage the decryption keys." Julian scrambled wildly to the central command console. He pulled a heavy titanium thumb drive from his jacket pocket and jammed it directly into the primary terminal. He frantically typed a sequence of override commands, his bloodshot eyes wide with a maniacal, desperate hope. For exactly 3 seconds, the massive terminal displayed a green loading bar. Then, the entire room plunged into absolute, terrifying darkness. Before Eleanor could even draw a breath to scream, the massive wall-to-wall primary monitor positioned at the front of the room blazed to life, bathing their sweaty, terrified faces in a harsh, unforgiving white glow. It was not a system diagnostic interface. It was a high-definition video call. I sat perfectly relaxed in a plush leather armchair, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The panoramic window behind me framed the breathtaking, sweeping ribbons of green and violet aurora borealis dancing gracefully across the Icelandic night sky. The contrast between my serene, majestic environment and their bleak, concrete tomb could not have been more absolute. Julian stumbled backward, his knees hitting the cold floor with a loud, dull thud. The last shred of his arrogant, untouchable tech billionaire persona instantly evaporated into thin air. He was completely broken. "Gianna," Julian choked out, heavy tears streaming down his grimy, unshaven face. He actually crawled closer to the screen on his hands and knees, clasping his hands together like a penitent sinner praying to a merciless God. "Please, please, Gianna, I am begging you. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about everything. You win. You completely win the game. Just unlock the server doors. Just stop the global broadcast. I will give you full, uncontested legal custody of Harper. I will sign over every single asset I have left. You can have the island house, the company shares, the offshore accounts, everything. Just please, save my life." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. I looked down at the pathetic creature groveling on the floor. "You have absolutely nothing left to offer me, Julian," I replied, my voice carrying the steady, freezing weight of a glacial avalanche. "The money is already gone, your reputation is ash, and Harper was never yours to bargain with in the first place." Eleanor lunged into the camera frame, her eyes bulging with unhinged, homicidal rage. "You ungrateful, malicious witch. We gave you everything. Turn this system back on right now, or I swear to God I will hunt you down and destroy you." I offered a small, terrifyingly cold smile. "You are not hunting anyone ever again. Eleanor, you see, when I sent that massive data dump to the drug cartels, the arms syndicates, and the corrupt politicians you two have been bleeding dry for a decade, I included a very special email attachment just for them." Julian stopped crying instantly. A look of absolute, soul-crushing horror washed over his pale face. "What did you do?" "I included the exact global positioning system coordinates of that specific London backup facility," I said, leaning closer to the camera lens so they could see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. "Along with the biometric entry codes to the front door. According to my live network traffic analysis, a heavily armed strike team from an Eastern European syndicate touched down at Heathrow Airport exactly 2 hours ago. They are likely pulling into your industrial park right this very second." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the implosion finally began. Eleanor let out a primal, blood-curdling shriek. She spun around and backhanded Julian across the face with such brutal force that he collapsed sideways, spitting blood onto the floor. "This is entirely your fault," Eleanor roared, kicking him violently in the ribs with her pointed shoe. "You brought this demon into my house. You insisted on marrying this gutter trash because you could not keep your pathetic, weak urges in check. You have killed us both." Julian finally snapped. The decades of emotional abuse, manipulation, and control he had suffered under his mother finally boiled over into violent rage. He tackled Eleanor to the concrete floor, his hands wrapping aggressively around her throat. "My fault," Julian screamed, spit flying from his lips as he squeezed with all his remaining strength. "You are the one who constantly demanded more money. You are the one who built the blackmail ring. Your bottomless, disgusting greed destroyed this family. I curse the day I was born to you, you greedy monster." I sat back in my chair in Iceland, watching the high-definition feed with absolute, unadulterated contempt. The elite, aristocratic Vance family, the untouchable masters of the tech universe who had looked down on me for years, were now rolling around on a dirty concrete floor, viciously tearing each other apart like rabid dogs fighting over scraps. All their endless talk of family loyalty, prestigious legacy, and superior breeding was nothing but a cheap, pathetic theatrical play. And as the sound of heavy armored vehicles screeching to a halt echoed through the microphones, the curtain finally fell. "Stop!" I commanded, my voice cutting sharply through their pathetic brawling over the heavy data center speakers. Julian froze, his hands still tightly wrapped around his mother's throat. Eleanor gasped violently for air, her face turning a deep shade of purple. I dropped my cold, mocking smile, leaning forward until my face filled every inch of their massive command screen. "Did you really believe I would leave your ultimate punishment up to a bunch of disorganized, violent street thugs?" I asked, my tone dripping with absolute authority. "I am a professional, Julian. I build highly secure systems, and I dismantle them strictly according to the letter of the law. This video call is not a private conversation between the three of us." Julian slowly let go of Eleanor, his bloodshot eyes wide with a new, much more profound kind of terrifying dread. "This live high-definition feed," I continued calmly, "along with the master decryption keys and the precise geographical coordinates to your little secret bunker, is currently being broadcast directly into the main conference room of the FBI Cyber Division headquarters. It is also streaming live to the Joint Task Forces at Interpol. The heavy sirens you are hearing outside right now do not belong to the Eastern European syndicates." At that exact second, the heavily reinforced steel door of the London data center did not just swing open, it violently exploded inward. The deafening blast of the breaching charge knocked both Julian and Eleanor backward into the humming server racks. Through the thick gray smoke and flying concrete debris, dozens of heavily armored Interpol tactical agents flooded the sterile room. Brilliant red laser sights painted the chests of the former tech royalty. They were forcefully thrown to the cold concrete floor, their hands secured behind their backs with heavy plastic zip ties. There was no escape, no high-priced defense lawyers to bribe their way out of this room. The physical servers surrounding them held the undeniable, unencrypted proof of a decade of their digital terrorism. The aftermath was a swift, highly publicized, and completely merciless execution of justice, because I had meticulously documented every single one of their crimes, legally surrendered the custom malware to the authorities, and operated entirely within the strict parameters of the federal cyber whistleblower program. I was granted absolute, ironclad legal immunity. Not only was I completely shielded from any prosecution, but the United States government awarded me a legal, tax-free bounty amounting to exactly $45 million for exposing one of the largest, most dangerous corporate extortion rings in modern history. The mighty Vance family empire was reduced to absolute ash. Every single asset, from the Mercer Island mega mansion to their hidden offshore cryptocurrency accounts, was seized and liquidated by federal authorities to compensate their countless victims. Julian and Eleanor were extradited back to the United States, publicly stripped of their power, their fake dignity, and their immense wealth. During the trial, Julian wept uncontrollably, but the federal judge showed zero mercy. They were both handed consecutive sentences totaling over 80 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. They would spend the rest of their miserable lives rotting away in tiny concrete cells, constantly looking over their shoulders. As for Chloe, the arrogant heiress was left entirely penniless and now works a minimum wage job, forever hiding from the dark web criminals who still hold a grudge. I did not take my massive federal reward money to live a life of idle, selfish luxury. I had seen firsthand exactly how technology could be weaponized by the powerful to ruthlessly crush the vulnerable. I used those tens of millions of dollars to found a global nonprofit technology organization. We specialized in providing unbreakable digital cover, highly secure encrypted communications, and untraceable financial relocation logistics for women and children fleeing from abusive, deeply powerful domestic situations. We became the invisible, impenetrable shield for those who had no voice. The game was finally over, and I had claimed the ultimate victory. I closed my heavy laptop, the screen going pitch black, and stepped out onto the freezing, breathtaking expanse of Reynisfjara, the famous black sand beach of Iceland, The roaring, majestic waves of the North Atlantic Ocean crashed violently against the towering, jagged basalt columns, but I felt nothing but absolute, overwhelming peace in my soul. Harper ran happily across the dark volcanic sand, her bright pink winter jacket a beautiful beacon of warmth against the stark, monochromatic landscape. She ran back and threw her tiny arms around my legs, her pure, innocent laughter echoing over the deafening sound of the ocean wind. I reached down and picked her up, hugging her tightly against my chest, and smiled brightly into the freezing air. I had personally burned a deeply evil billion-dollar empire completely to the ground, just to build an eternal, unshakable fortress of peace for my daughter. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Where in the world are you listening from? Please let us know in the comments section below. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping our team with just $1. You can easily support us by scanning the donation QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity provides the essential salary for our hardworking staff, allowing them to support their families and continue creating even better, more thrilling stories for you to enjoy. Thank you, and stay safe out there.